Penicillin. Penicillin is the world's first true antibiotic, born from a mold spore that drifted into a dirty petri dish at St. Mary's Hospital in London in late summer 1928. Alexander Fleming, a Scottish bacteriologist, had left a tray of Staphylococcus aureus cultures uncovered when he departed for a holiday in Suffolk. He returned on September 3rd to find one plate where a blue-green fungus, later identified as Penicillium notatum, had killed every bacterium in a wide halo around itself. The spore most likely drifted up from Charles Latouche's mycology lab 1 floor below. Conditions were absurdly precise. A cold snap let the fungus germinate first, followed by a warm spell that pushed the bacteria into its killing zone. Fleming named the substance mold juice, published his findings in 1929, and then largely abandoned the project. Howard Florey and Ernst Chain at Oxford finally purified it in 1940 in time to treat Allied casualties by D-Day. Before antibiotics, child mortality sat at roughly 1 in 20 live births. Today, it sits near 3.5 per 1,000. Fleming was also a hobbyist germ painter who composed tiny landscapes from pigmented microbes, which is exactly why he refused to throw any plate away. Insulin. Insulin reframed diabetes from a death sentence into a manageable condition, and the path to its discovery began with a dog whose pancreas had been removed for an entirely different reason. In 1889, at the University of Strasbourg, physiologists Oskar Minkowski and Joseph von Mering removed the pancreas of a healthy dog to study how the organ contributed to fat digestion. Days later, an assistant complained that the animal was urinating constantly on the laboratory floor. According to the famous account, flies and ants began swarming the puddles, and Minkowski tested the urine to find sugar levels above 10%. The dog had become diabetic overnight, proving for the first time that the pancreas controlled blood glucose. The crucial substance, secreted by the islets of Langerhans, would not be isolated until 1921, when Frederick Banting and Charles Best at the University of Toronto extracted what they called isletin. On January 11, 1922, 14-year-old Leonard Thompson became the first human patient to receive the purified extract, and his blood sugar dropped within hours. Banting and John MacLeod won the Nobel Prize in 1923. Minkowski himself denied the ant story for the rest of his life. Cardiac pacemaker. The implantable cardiac pacemaker keeps the heartbeat of roughly 3 million patients steady around the world, and it exists because Wilson Greatbatch grabbed the wrong component out of a parts bin in 1956. Greatbatch, an electrical engineer at the University of Buffalo, was building an oscillator to record cardiac rhythms when he reached for a 10,000 ohm resistor and instead installed a 1 megohm resistor. When he switched the circuit on, it produced rhythmic pulses identical in cadence to a healthy heartbeat. He recognized the pattern immediately and recalled a conversation with 2 cardiac surgeons who had described the agony of patients dying from heart block. Earlier external pacemakers from the early 1950s were the size of console televisions, plugged into wall outlets, and routinely burned the skin or shocked patients during power failures. Greatbatch shrank the device using new transistor technology and a mercury battery. In 1960, the first long-lasting implant was placed in a 77-year-old man at Millard Fillmore Hospital in Buffalo, New York. The patient lived another 18 months. The National Academy of Engineering later named the implantable pacemaker one of the 20 greatest engineering achievements of the 20th century, all because Greatbatch misread a label. Chemotherapy. Modern chemotherapy was born from a war crime committed by accident in an Italian harbor on the night of December 2, 1943. The Allied port of Bari, packed with supply ships, was attacked by 105 German Junkers 88 bombers in what became known as the Second Pearl Harbor. The American freighter SS John Harvey, carrying a secret cargo of 2,000 mustard gas bombs, exploded and released a toxic plume into the water and air. Roughly 628 military personnel and an unknown number of Italian civilians were exposed, and 83 died directly from mustard gas poisoning. The clinical disaster came next. Medical staff did not know about the secret cargo and treated survivors only for shock and burns, leaving them wrapped in oil-soaked blankets for hours. Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Francis Alexander, a U.S. chemical warfare expert, was sent to investigate. He noticed that survivors had near-zero white blood cell counts and that intact tumors had shrunk in autopsy specimens. His report, suppressed for decades, prompted Yale researchers Louis Goodman and Alfred Gilman to test nitrogen mustard against lymphoma. By 1949, meclorethamine, sold as Mustargan, had become the first FDA-approved chemotherapy drug. Inhaled anesthesia. Inhalational anesthesia ended the era of biting on leather straps during surgery, and it was discovered by a Connecticut dentist watching a stage show in December 1844. Horace Wells, age 29, attended a traveling exhibition by showman gardener Quincy Colton in Hartford, where audience members inhaled nitrous oxide for laughs. Wells watched a hardware clerk named Samuel Cooley smash his shin bloody against a wooden bench while still giggling, completely unaware of the wound. The next morning, Wells had his colleague John Riggs extract one of his own molars while he inhaled the gas, and he felt nothing. He performed at least 15 successful extractions over the following weeks. In January 1845, Wells traveled to Massachusetts General Hospital to demonstrate the technique before Harvard medical students. But the bag of gas was pulled away too soon, and the patient cried out. The audience shouted, "Humbug!" and ran him out of the lecture hall. Wells spiraled into a chloroform addiction. Was arrested in New York in 1848 for throwing acid on 2 women while intoxicated, and on January 24, 1848, slashed his own femoral artery in his cell at the Tombs prison after inhaling chloroform to numb the pain. Viagra. Sildenafil, marketed as Viagra by Pfizer, became the first oral treatment for erectile dysfunction after spectacularly failing as a heart medication. The compound internally coded U. K922480 was developed at Pfizer's research facility in Sandwich, Kent, beginning in 1989 as a phosphodiesterase type 5 inhibitor intended to relax coronary arteries and treat angina. Clinical trials in the early 1990s at Morriston Hospital in Swansea, Wales, were unimpressive. The drug barely improved blood flow to the heart. Welsh nurses, however, kept reporting an unusual side effect among the male volunteers, who refused to roll over for examinations and complained about persistent erections lasting hours after each dose. Pfizer scientists initially dismissed the complaint as a curiosity. Researcher Chris Wayman ran follow-up tests on isolated penile tissue and confirmed that the molecule was extraordinarily selective for the corpus cavernosum, the spongy chambers inside the penis that fill with blood. The FDA approved Viagra on March 27, 1998, and Pfizer dispensed roughly 9 million prescriptions in the first year alone. By the time the patent expired in 2017, sildenafil had generated over $35 billion in revenue. The cardiology project was, by every other measure, a failure. Botox, botulinum toxin, the most lethal biological substance known to science, became a billion-dollar cosmetic empire because a Canadian patient demanded a forehead injection she had never been prescribed. Ophthalmologist Jean Carruthers, working in Vancouver in the late 1980s, was using small doses of botulinum toxin type A to treat blepharospasm, a condition that causes the eyelids to clamp shut uncontrollably. One regular patient noticed that the wrinkles between her eyebrows had vanished after treatment, and she refused to leave her next appointment until Carruthers injected the forehead too. Jean told her dermatologist husband Alistair, and the couple began testing the cosmetic effect in their own clinic. They published their findings in 1992. The toxin works by blocking acetylcholine release at the neuromuscular junction, paralyzing the targeted muscle for 3 to 4 months. Pure botulinum toxin is so potent that 1 gram, evenly distributed and inhaled, could theoretically kill more than 1 million people. The FDA approved the cosmetic use of Botox on April 15, 2002. Allergan, the manufacturer, now sells the drug in over 90 countries, generating roughly $4 billion in annual revenue from a refined version of the bacterium that causes botulism poisoning. Attenuated vaccines. The principle of attenuated vaccines, The foundation of modern immunology was discovered when Louis Pasteur left a laboratory unattended over a long French summer. In 1879, in Paris, Pasteur was studying chicken cholera caused by the bacterium Pasteurella multicida. He instructed his assistant Charles Chamberlain to inoculate a fresh batch of chickens before going on holiday. But Chamberlain forgot and left the cultures sitting on a shelf for several weeks. When the team returned and used the aged bacteria, the chickens fell mildly ill and recovered. Pasteur then re-injected the same birds with a fresh, virulent culture, expecting them to die within hours. They didn't. The aged exposure had granted full immunity. Pasteur named the principle vaccination in honor of Edward Jenner's earlier smallpox work and applied it next to anthrax in 1881 and to rabies in 1885, when 9-year-old Joseph Meister became the first human saved from a fatal bite. Pasteur was technically wrong about the mechanism. He believed weakened microbes simply consumed the host's nutrients and starved out future invaders. The actual immune memory pathway would not be understood for another 70 years. The chickens, of course, didn't care. Coronary angiography. Coronary angiography, the imaging technique that lets cardiologists see inside living arteries to spot dangerous blockages, was born from a near-fatal slip of the wrist on October 30th, 1958. F. Mason Soanes Jr., a cardiologist at the Cleveland Clinic, was performing a routine aortogram on a 26-year-old man with rheumatic heart disease. He intended to inject radiocontrast dye into the aorta itself, where the body could safely dilute it. Instead, the catheter slipped directly into the right coronary artery, and roughly 30 milliliters of dye flooded a vessel barely the diameter of a coffee stirrer. The patient's heart stopped within seconds. Soanes, expecting to be sued or fired, jumped onto the table and shouted at the patient to cough hard. The forceful coughing acted as a manual chest compression, cleared the dye, and restarted the heart. The patient survived without injury. Soanes realized within minutes that small, targeted injections directly into a coronary artery were not lethal after all. The accident opened the door to selective coronary angiography, which made bypass surgery possible when René Favaloro performed the first vein graft at the Cleveland Clinic in 1967 and later enabled angioplasty and stenting. Warfarin. Warfarin, today the most widely prescribed oral blood thinner in the world, started its career as a rat poison brewed from spoiled hay and a forgotten herd of dead cows. In 1933, Wisconsin farmer Ed Carlson drove through a blizzard to the University of Wisconsin with a dead heifer, a milk can full of unclottable blood, and a stack of moldy sweet clover. Biochemist Carl Paul Link took the case. Over the next 6 years, Link's team isolated decumarol, a compound formed when Penicillium fungi attacked coumarin in the rotting clover and triggered fatal internal bleeding in livestock. A more potent synthetic version, named Warfarin after the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation that funded the work, hit the market in 1948 as a rodenticide that killed rats by slow internal hemorrhage. Doctors considered it far too dangerous for humans until 1951, when an American Navy inductee at the Great Lakes Naval Training Center swallowed a full box of rat poison in a suicide attempt. He survived after receiving vitamin K, demonstrating that the effect was reversible and dose-dependent. The FDA approved Warfarin for human use in 1954. President Dwight D. Eisenhower received it the following year after his heart attack. If you enjoyed this catalog of beautiful disasters, subscribe for more deep dives into the strange origins of modern science